It just occurred to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Done.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, so I think I'll proceed. Somebody who will watch it in recording will just miss the beginning. No problem. Okay, so the slides that follow demonstrate the features that were suggested by Douglas Biber for his multi-dimensional analysis. So in fact, there are 67 features in total, which are organized by 16 grammatical classes. So the first grammatical class, as you can see on the slide, is called tense and aspect markers, and it includes past tense, perfect aspect, and present tense. Then there is place and time adverbials. Pronouns and proverbs is the third class. So here there are different types of person pronouns, demonstrative and indefinite pronouns, and also the so-called proverb do, which substitute for a fuller verb, phrase, or clause. Then the next grammatical class is questions, namely WH questions, nominal forms, nominalizations, gerunds, and total other nouns. Then two types of passives and stative forms like be as main verb, which is typically used to modify a noun with a predicative expression rather instead of integrating the information into a noun phrase itself. For example, the cat is white rather than the white cat. And existential there, which is used to introduce a new entity. For example, there are several reasons for that. Then a number of subordinate features, like different types of that complements, participial clauses, different types of relative clauses, then positive adverbial subordinators, and other types of adverbial subordinators. Then the next grammatical class is called prepositional phrases, adjectives, and adverbs. Some features of lexical specificity, namely tape, token, ratio, mean, word length. And different lexical classes are also involved into multidimensional analysis. They are conjuncts, downtoners, hedges, amplifiers, emphatics, discourse particles, demonstratives. Three types of modal verbs. They are possibility modals, necessity modals, and predictive modals. Specialized verb classes. Douglas Biber distinguishes four specialized classes of verbs. They are public, private, persuasive, and semantic here, which form one class. So public verbs involve actions that can be observed publicly. They are primarily speech act verbs such as say, explain, declare, and so on. Then private verbs, which express intellectual states. So this class also corresponds with verbs of cognition used in other studies. And the examples of such verbs are believe, discover, doubt, and so on. And suasive verbs, which imply intentions to bring about some change in the future, such as command, stipulate, insist, and so on. So then reduced forms of dispreferred structures. And two last grammatical classes are coordination and negation, both synthetic and analytic. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of different variables which are involved into multidimensional analysis, and in order to handle such a large number of variables, Douglas Biber proposed employing factor analysis. Factor analysis allows researchers to reduce the original variables to a small set of derived variables, which are called factors. So each factor, in fact, represents an area of high shared variance in the data, a grouping of linguistic features that co-occur with high frequency. And factors are linear combinations of the original variables derived from a correlation matrix of all variables. So the picture on the slide demonstrates basically what it is about. So now I'm going to tell you about the way Douglas Biber conducted his multidimensional analysis. So first of all, a few words about his data. So he used two quite famous corpora of British English. They are the Lancaster-Oslo-Bergen corpus of British English, which is called LOB, and London Land corpus of spoken English. So spoken genres include different types of conversations, like telephone conversation or face-to-face conversation. That these examples of these genres are provided in London Land corpus. And as for some examples of written genres, they are very different. In fact, like biographies, press reviews, academic prose, official documents, and so on. So in total, 23 spoken and written genres were analyzed. And talking about the size of the data, there were 481 texts amounting to approximately 960,000 words. So first, frequencies of the features that we have just discussed were calculated. Then factor analysis was conducted in order to decrease the number of variables and in order to determine statistically significant factors such as dimensions. And then microanalysis of linguistic features identified by each factor were carried out. So that is more qualitative analysis of the data was conducted. So in total, there were 6 dimensions that are proposed by Douglas Biber as a result of his study. So the first dimension was interpreted as involved versus informational production. And the positive pole of this dimension includes texts with interactive or affective purpose, which are characterized by a reduced surface form, a generalized or uncertain way of presenting information, and real-time production circumstances. So as you would probably guess, so a vivid example of such a text would be face-to-face or telephone conversation. While on the negative pole, that is informational production, there are highly edited informative texts with carefully integrated information and precise lexical choice, which are, for example, official documents. And talking about the linguistic features that contribute to the first dimension, on the positive pole, there are first and second person pronouns, WH questions, emphatics, amplifiers, sentence relatives, tab deletions, contractions, and so on. And on the negative pole, nouns, word length, prepositional phrases, type token ratio, and attributive adjectives. So these features were found to be frequently used and were found to co-occur on the registers that were on the negative pole, like, as I have already said, official documents. So the second dimension, called narrative versus non-narrative concerns. Well, the positive pole are texts with narrative purpose, for example, fiction, romantic fiction, and the negative pole, text concerned with building arguments. And surprisingly, according to Douglas Biber's findings, the genre with the largest negative loadings on this dimension were broadcasts, hobbyist broadcasts. And the linguistic features which characterize the second dimension are past tense verbs, third person pronouns, perfect past verbs, public verbs, synthetic negation, and present participial clauses. All these features are used in texts with narration. And negative pole is characterized by present tense verbs and attributive adjectives. Then the third dimension, explicit versus situation dependent reference. So it contrasts texts that identify references fully and explicitly through relativization on the one hand, and negatives that rely on situational context for identification purposes on the other. So the positive pole is explained via the contribution of such features as WH relative clauses on object and subject position, pied piping constructions. So pied piping constructions are like a financial base on which to work. So this is an example of a pied piping construction. Then phrasal coordination and nominalization. And on the positive pole, again, there are official documents, and the negative pole is characterized by salient frequencies of place and time adverbials and adverbs. And the examples are different types of broadcasts. The fourth dimension, overt expression of persuasion. It involves, on the one hand, texts in which the speaker expresses their own point of view or with argumentative styles and intended to persuade the addressee, like in, for example, in face-to-face conversation. And on the negative pole, texts that lack overt persuasion features, such as press reviews. And interestingly, there were no statistically significant negative features with negative loading on this dimension. So there, since there are no specific features on the negative pole, the genres that are considered to be there on the negative pole are, they simply lack the features of the positive pole, such as infinitives, prediction modals, persuasive verbs, conditional subordination, necessity modals, split auxiliaries, and possibility modals. The fifth dimension was interpreted as abstract versus non-abstract information, and the abstract pole, the text with abstract information, are those that present information with little or no emphasis on the agent, that is, with a highly abstract and technical information focus, like this is often the case in academic prose, which is a vivid example of salient loadings on dimension 1, while the negative pole involves texts with non-abstract focuses, for example, conversation and fiction. And like in the case of the previous dimension, dimension 4, in dimension 5, there are no features on the negative pole. So this pole is characterized simply by a lack of the features on the positive pole, like conjuncts, agent as passives and passives with biphrases, participial clauses, post-nominal clauses, and other adverbial subordinates. And finally, dimension 6, what's called online informational elaboration. So here on the positive pole, there are informational texts that are produced only under highly constrained conditions in which the information is presented in a relatively loose, fragmented manner with the speaker's attitudes and beliefs. So this is quite typical of prepared speeches, which are an example of genres that are on the positive pole of this dimension, versus on the negative pole, there are other types of discourse, whether informational discourse that is highly integrated or discourse that is not informational, for example, fiction. And the linguistic features of this dimension are presented on the slide. So the positive pole is explained through the use of that clauses as verb complements, demonstratives, that relative clauses on object position, and that clauses on as adjectival complements, while the negative pole involves only phrasal coordination. So that's it. These are the 6 dimensions that were identified by Douglas Biber. And I should say that since the publication of the book in 1988, the approach, this multidimensional analysis, has really gained popularity, not only because of the large scope, but the versatile nature of this analysis, but also because some tools were developed which use this approach and which simplify the analysis. I'm now talking about multidimensional analysis TAGA, developed by NINI, and also the statistical tool developed at the University of Lancaster, which simplifies conducting factor analysis. So a lot of studies, a lot of scholars have adopted this methodology, this approach to their data. And now I'm going to tell you a few words about such studies. So in fact, according to Conrad and Biber, there are 2 types of multidimensional analysis studies. They are those that apply previously suggested dimensions, such as these 6 Biber's dimensions that I have just described, and those that conduct factor analysis to determine new dimensions. The benefit of the first group of studies is that the results of such studies are perfectly comparable, while the new factor analysis enables researchers to create new dimensions of variation specific to their data, to their texts. So we will look at both these types now. So the study that refers to the first pool of studies was conducted by Peter Crosthwaite, Dr. Peter Crosthwaite from the University of Queensland, Australia. But in fact, when he conducted the research I'm going to talk about, he was affiliated with a different university, the University of Hong Kong, China. And that is where he conducted his research. So the work is called a longitudinal multidimensional analysis of EAP writing, determining EAP course effectiveness, and it was published in 2016 in the famous Journal of English for Academic Purposes. So on this slide, you can see the data that the author used. So in fact, he used a corpus of EAP essays and reports written by Chinese undergraduate students before and after a 13-week EAP training course. So in fact, his corpus comprised of 3 sub-corpora. So that is texts written during the first week of the EAP course, the so-called pre-EAP training texts. Then texts written during the 10th week of the course, the 10th or the 9th weeks of the course, that is post-EAP training course, and final assessment, that is essays or reports produced under exam conditions in the final week of the course. So, and the table shows the size of his corpus. So what Peter Crossway did was that he performed 3 analyses of his data, 1 for each data point, using the tool that I have mentioned, that is multidimensional analysis SAGA. He used the tag analyze function of this tool, and this tool allows you to gain some quantitative results, some statistical data. So the author compared the dimensional Z-scores provided by the tool. And here are some of his research findings, which are quite, positive, quite optimistic in terms of the effectiveness of EAP courses. So, well, that very EAP course, which was run at Hong Kong University. So first, he found that in a period of 13 weeks, students' production exhibited sufficient and significant variation towards a more academic register. So the learners' texts became more academic than they were at the beginning of the course. Then the results showed very significant effects of instruction across all the 5 dimensions that he used. Well, you see, he did use Biber's dimension, but not 6, but only 5 of them. And in particular, he found that by the end of the training, the Chinese students started using different, more advanced grammatical means to organize their texts than they used to before the beginning of the course. So finally, the EAP training resulted in a more cautious presentation of stance overall, which is also a vivid feature of academic discourse, of an academic text. Now, talking about the second pool of studies suggesting new dimensions, studies that conduct factor analysis. So I would like to tell you about a recent one, where a research that was published in 2021, last year, and this research was conducted by Kongjun Mu, professor at Shanghai University, China. And the work is called a multidimensional contrastive analysis of linguistic features between international and local biology journal English research articles. So in this study, the data was comparable corpus of research articles in biology with three subcorpora. So the first subcorpus was English subcorpus of research articles published in an international journal. Well, in fact, the author claims that the articles were written by native speakers, though it is not mentioned in the paper how he checked that the authors of those papers were really native speakers of English. Then Chinese subcorpus of research articles published in a local journal. So you can see the name in the table. Unfortunately, I'm unable to read it. And the translation of the Chinese subcorpus. So in fact, the editors of that Chinese journal suggest that the authors of the most prominent in their view papers submit them also in English to be published in the journal called Science in China Life Sciences, which is the journal that publishes papers in English. And this way, the author could obtain a parallel corpus of research articles. So the original ones in Chinese and their translations in English. And the availability of this data allowed him not only to compare the academic texts written by English authors, by native speakers of English versus Chinese authors, but also to study L1 transfer, that is the influence of the Chinese authors' first language on their written production in English. So, and there were some interesting research findings connected with this language transfer in this work as well. So, the method that the author used is as follows. So, first of all, the corpus was tagged with the same instrument as in the previous, as was used in the previous study, the multidimensional analysis tagger. Then the statistical data was imported into the R. Well, I think you know this is a free software environment for statistical computing and graphics, and also Lancaster Stats toolbox for further factor analysis. So as a result of the factor analysis, НИУ identified 5 dimensions specific for his data. And these dimensions, as you will see, are different from those suggested by Douglas Biber. So different from the original dimensions. So the first dimension proposed by Moore was interpreted as academic involvement versus information density. And the author found that native English writers have a stronger preference for an interactive style in their writing than non-native English writers do. And it was also found that the Chinese authors' texts were denser with information than the ones written by the native speakers of English. The second dimension was called conceptual elaboration, and even though the difference between the English and Chinese texts was found to be insignificant, the author points out some the extensive use of pre-modifiers and the verb be as the main verb in the Chinese research articles. And he explains this by the influence of Chinese, where these structures are very typical. The third dimension, called intensification versus intention. So the finding related to this dimension is that Chinese research articles express a stronger tone and certainty than the international research articles. This is achieved by means of emphatics, place adverbials, and predicted models. The fourth dimension, formal, abstract, impersonal style. So the Chinese research article corpus shows a significantly higher factor mean score than the international research articles corpus on dimension 4. Non-native English-speaking authors were found to overuse passives in order to meet the English rhetorical conventions. Well, in fact, we have come to the same conclusions after analyzing our data, our text of Russian-speaking students. So we also found that they tend to overuse passives in their texts in comparison with professional authors. So in this respect, most findings are in line with ours. So then the conclusions that НИУ has come up with are on the slide. So the first one concerns the difference between international and Chinese research articles. So the international research articles were found to be more interactive and context independent, while the Chinese research articles were found to be more emphatic in tone and context dependent. That is, the topics raised in the Chinese research articles were usually devoted to some local realia and would be difficult to understand for international readers. And also it was found that Chinese authors transfer such linguistic features as pre-modifiers and emphatics from Chinese into English. And as I have mentioned, they tend to overuse passives in an attempt to comply with academic English conventions, which is typically associated with an extensive use of the passive voice. Okay, so that's it. And the final part of my talk today will be devoted to my study, which is still in progress, I should say. So my study undertakes quantitative and qualitative analysis of register variation conducted on a corpus of research articles in 4 hard and 4 soft sciences. And the goal of my study is twofold. So first, I aim at describing the linguistic factors that exert influence on register variation in academic discourse. And second, the aim is to test the hypothesis that there are significant differences in the realization of such linguistic features across disciplines. And so I should also say that the division hard versus soft sciences was first suggested by Storer back in 1967. So as you probably know, hard sciences are applied in empirical, experimental, and natural disciplines like astronomy, biology, mathematics, and physics, while the soft sciences are the social sciences like history, linguistics, literature, political science, and so on. And my work combines 2 approaches I talked about today. So on the one hand, I analyze the factors suggested by Biber, and on the other hand, I conducted factor analysis, so I will try to suggest my own factors, that is, dimensions. So here on the slide, you can see the data, my data. So it's a corpus of research articles published in leading peer-reviewed journals in 8 disciplines: 4 hard, disciplines such as chemistry, physics, mathematics, and engineering. And for soft sciences, business studies, linguistics, history, and political science. So the corpus amounts to approximately 1,600,000 words, and you can see, as you can see from the table, it is balanced in terms of the number of tokens referring to each discipline. That is approximately 200,000 tokens for each subcorpus. So the method is as follows. So first, the multidimensional analysis was performed using the multidimensional analysis saga developed by Mini, and then factor analysis was performed with the help of one-factor stats toolbox. So this table demonstrates mean dimension scores for research articles in different disciplines obtained with Mini's multidimensional analysis tool. So first, we can see that texts in most disciplines were labeled as scientific exposition by the tagger, except papers in chemistry, history, and political science, whose closest text type was defined as learned exposition, meaning that they were found to be less technical than the other sciences. Second, at first glance, it appears that there is no particular trend as regards the indices for the dimensions for hard and soft sciences, except dimensions 2, that is narrative versus non-narrative concerns, as you remember, and dimension 6, online informational elaboration. So as you can see, both hard and soft sciences evince negative mean factor loadings on dimension 2. Not surprisingly, hard sciences have larger scores, which means that hard science papers have a less narrative character than texts in soft sciences. As for dimension 6, hard sciences are on the negative pole of this factor, meaning that they are more concerned with integrated informational discourse and employ more phrasal coordination features than soft sciences. So, but I'm going to conduct a micro-analysis for each discipline. So that is qualitative analysis of the features, and I think I will come up with more findings concerning this this part. And at the next stage, factor analysis was conducted, and a single factor, in fact, proved to explain almost 67% of variance. So in light of the grouping of the features and their contribution, that is factor loadings, into such a factor, it was interpreted as involved versus argumentative style. On the one hand, this dimension, as you can see, is characterized by the salient frequencies of features with positive loadings, such as amplifiers, present tense verbs, and prepositional phrases, which prepositional phrases commonly function as situational adverbials. And on the other hand, the negative, that is argumentative pole, is explained by the contribution of features such as those such as agent arguments, passives and first-person subjects, links in discourse, that is conjunctions, predictive modals, and narrative features like time adverbials, and also the features that are generally associated with increased linguistic complexity, that is WH clauses and gerunds. And once the relevant features and their contribution to the resulting dimension were determined, the disciplines, the 8 disciplines for hard and for soft, were plotted along the dimension. So such a scaling revealed a distinct trend of soft sciences clustering toward the top of the scale, that is closer to the involved style pole, while the hard sciences were located in the lower part, interpreted as evincing argumentative style. So, so far I have come up with the following conclusions. First, the hard sciences tend to be less narrative and less concerned with the author stance than the soft sciences. And second, the hard sciences, especially mathematics, evince more argumentative style than the soft sciences. So in general, these conclusions are in line with our stereotypes about hard and soft sciences. But as I said, I'm going to go deeper into qualitative analysis of the data, and maybe there will be some surprising findings as well. So here you can see the references I used for this talk. Thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Елизавета Alexandrovna, thank you for your brilliant talk. I'm sorry not to give the floor immediately to those who want to come up with a question. Can I ask you to please fill in a very short questionnaire at the link I have just sent to chat? And for the English-speaking people among us, maybe you can just need Nuria, if you can quickly state your position and your institution in chat, that would be great. And thank you for attending the seminar.
Hi, thank you. I was just writing in the chat that I need to leave quickly because I'm teaching in about 15 minutes. But I was writing that, thank you. I'm from the University of Vigo, sorry, I forgot to say.
Okay.
So it's great to see you, Elizaveta. I will fill in the form quickly before I leave, but I was just precisely writing that. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's been great to attend and for the opportunity to join you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Questions then, please. I'm dying to know what makes chemistry closer to soft science.
Yeah, so that is interesting indeed. Well, chemistry was found to be quite special in terms of complexity as well, because so I used the same data for my study of complexity, and you know, chemistry was found to be closer to soft sciences, while political science was found to be closer to hard sciences.
I can understand that, yes.
Yeah, well, as for political science, it's quite easy to explain because it uses statistical modeling, you know, more extensively than other soft sciences do. So, well, but as for chemistry, maybe that is because of the length of words, that is names of those, you know, chemical entities and processes. So maybe in terms of that. But as I said, I'm going to conduct more qualitative analysis, and I think I will be able to answer your question then.
Yeah, good. I'll look forward to it. А мы, между прочим, уже можем говорить по-русски, потому что у нас не осталось людей, не говорящих по-русски, правда?
Да.
Спасибо. Спасибо. Вопросы, пожалуйста, у кого есть?
Здравствуйте, коллеги. Ну, вот меня, да, в первую очередь интересует вот этот момент с выводами, которые действительно прям попадают просто в определение того, что такое науки естественные и гуманитарные. Да? И вот насколько тут можно чего-то еще ожидать, в каком направлении вообще можно двигаться, чтобы это не было просто камнем такого преткновения, что вот мы подтвердили стереотип и все. Вот какой-то, может быть, исследовательский это шаг дальше.
Ну, во-первых, то, что мы научно подтвердили стереотип, это уже хорошо, я считаю. Во-вторых, я думаю, что здесь будут какие-то интересные вещи, связанные даже не с этим, вот не с двумя группами, да, дисциплин, hard и soft, а вот с конкретными дисциплинами, как вот, например, да, Ольга Ильинична уже отметила, chemistry. Вообще сейчас есть такой тренд в зарубежных исследованиях, когда они просто концентрируются вот даже не на каких-то practical implications, что вообще характерно, да, для западных исследований, но вообще на description, то есть что это представляет из себя там какой-то тип дискурса. И вот там чем подробнее анализ, чем интереснее какие-то вещи всплывают, вот именно для описательных целей, вот тем лучше. То есть я думаю, что с этой точки зрения тоже перспектива исследований есть. Плюс, как вы, наверное, знаете, вообще это деление на hard soft sciences критикуется активно в литературе. То есть вот в 1967 году его предложили, а потом его начали активно критиковать, и потом предложили уже другие, более, как считается, такие, как это сказать правильно, адекватную классификацию, как-то там life, да, sciences, например, там, arts, да, или там просто sciences, которые там biology, chemistry и прочее. Ну, а здесь, возможно, если явный тренд прослеживается, то он как раз может реабилитировать вот этот изначальный подход, который, в принципе, удобнее, мне кажется, чем все другие, потому что он достаточно однозначный и, ну, достаточно крупный, а всегда все, что крупнее, это удобнее, в принципе, для использования, ну, вот, с точки зрения номенклатуры, да, чем она крупнее, тем, в принципе, проще ей пользоваться. Вот еще один момент.
Понятно. Круто. Вот дескриптивный, да, момент, это интересный. И потом в эти это можно вывести там и в нормативику, в преподавание, получается, да, например, в то же самое, да, вот тоже. А с другой стороны, я так заметил на одном слайде, engineering попала как бы тоже не в свою по факторному, по-моему, анализу. То есть что-то все-таки hard и soft не совсем вот прямо вот ровно, да, ложится.
Ну да, там просто такой тренд есть, все равно, что вот большая часть, но есть такие вот аутсайдеры, действительно. То есть,
может быть, вот. Да, вот если на них сосредоточиться, там всплывают какие-то инсайты.
Да, надеюсь.
Хорошо, спасибо.
Коллеги, есть ли еще вопросы?
А почему именно этот список параметров, а не какие-то еще?
Вы имеете в виду, почему Байбер предложил именно эти параметры? Или почему, или вы уже говорите о моем исследовании, почему именно этот фактор был формулирован?
Ну, скорее вы просто ему доверились, взяли этот список, или почему не расширить, не исследовать еще что-то? Или у него
вот эти 67 маркеров, да, вы имеете в виду их, или только те, которые вошли вот в описание фактора в моем исследовании?
Ну, скорее про ваши.
Да, если говорить о моем исследовании, то я опиралась уже на статистические данные, то есть вот когда все, как это по-русски сложнее сформулировать, все средняя частотность использования всех вот этих 67 параметров была проанализирована машиной, да, вот проведен статистический анализ, то я получила вот эти вот factor loadings, положить со знаком плюс и со знаком минус, и выбрала только те где цифра была больше даже не 0,35, как рекомендует Байбер, а вообще 0,50, то есть что это точно статистически значимо. И работала уже только с этими маркерами, а все остальные уже не принимала во внимание. То есть это основывается на статистическом анализе. Если же говорить о тех маркеров, которые были выбраны Байбером, 67, я, кстати, думала, что мне зададут на самом деле этот вопрос, потому что он у меня у самой возник, почему именно 67 этих особенностей. Ну, в книге у него он опирается на свои предыдущие исследования. До того, как он придумал вот этот multidimensional analysis, у него были еще работы. И я думаю, что у него цель была максимально полно описать язык, и вот он сформулировал вот эти вот 67, потом, я думаю, список он расширил, и к тому моменту, когда он опубликовал свою знаменитую соавторстве грамматику 99-го года, у него уже список расширился, хотя надо вот проверить, интересно было бы. То есть,
ну, тут скорее вопрос, почему бы не сузить. Ну, то есть, я так понимаю, никаких R в квадрате, никаких еще методов отбора признаков вы не использовали.
R в квадрате и прочие вот эти статистические величины используются уже встроены в тот инструмент, который я использовала. Это очень удобно,
понятно.
поэтому это уже конечный список вот усеченный, да, параметров, которые вошли в описание фактора моего единственного, они уже статистически значимы с учетом всех R в квадрате и прочего. Я, к сожалению, да, дальше углубиться в детали не могу, поскольку в статистике, честно признаюсь, не сильна, но хвала специалистам университета Ланкастера, которые сделали возможным проведение этого анализа, даже не будучи специалистом статистики.
Да, в Лангсбокс, там,
Спасибо.
как Эдуард Станиславович, в Лангсбокс, как по волшебству, вы нажимаете кнопочку, и на ваши данные выдают всю подборку статистических наблюдений.
Ну, у нас тут не прикладная магия, а прикладная лингвистика, поэтому хотелось бы...
Да.
Ну, понятно, где искать.
Главное их проинтерпретировать потом. Вот в этом сложность заключается. Вот вся вот эта вот механика и статистика остается за кадром, чему я очень рада.
Спасибо.
Угу. Так, ну если больше нет вопросов, коллеги, большое спасибо за внимание. Тогда, Ольга Ильинична, вы пришлете нам ссылку, да, мы ее разместим на страничке. Может быть,
ссылку я послала в чат.
Нет, я имею в виду на запись.
Запись обязательно пришлю, и если вы не против, я запись остановлю, а мы еще поговорим на лабораторные темы немножко с сотрудниками лаборатории Московского кампуса, если можно.
Да, тогда по отчету